The bells of Blackthorn Abbey, on the outskirts of Yorkshire, where the moors roll like frozen waves beneath a sky of iron, stood the ruins of Blackthorn Abbey, once a Benedictine monastery. It had been abandoned since the winter of 1642, when every monk within was found frozen in prayer, their faces twisted toward the rafters, as though listening to something no mortal ear should hear. The abbey was cursed, or so the villagers whispered. Its bells had not tolled in centuries. Yet on Christmas Eve, travellers swore they heard them. Deep, mournful chimes, rolling across the moors like thunder. In December of 1891, a group of antiquarians received an invitation from Lord Ashcombe, a wealthy eccentric who had purchased the abbey. He promised a Christmas gathering unlike any other, a midnight service in the ruined chapel, where the bells would ring once more. Among the guests was Dr. Elias Harrow, a folklorist obsessed with monastic legends. He had read of the abbey's final winter, of the monks who died kneeling, and of the villagers who claimed the bells were rung not by hands, but by something that lived in the tower. Snow fell in sheets as the guests arrived. The abbey loomed like a carcass against the horizon, its spire jagged, its stained glass shattered. Yet the great bell tower stood intact, blackened by centuries of soot. Inside, Lord Ashcombe greeted them with unsettling cheer. He had decorated the ruined nave with holly and candles, their flames guttering in the draughts. A massive fir tree stood at the altar, hung not with ornaments, but with iron chains. Tonight, we shall hear the bells of Blackthorn once more. And when they toll, the dead shall join us in worship. The guests laughed nervously, but Harrow felt the air tighten. He had studied enough folklore to know that bells were not merely instruments. They were wards, binding spirits, summoning angels, or calling demons. At the stroke of midnight, Ashcombe led them into the chapel. The candles flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move against the walls. Harrow noticed frost creeping across the stones, though no wind stirred. Then it began. The bells tolled, not with the bright peal of celebration, but with a dull, funereal groan. Each strike reverberated through the marrow, shaking dust from the rafters. The guests clutched their ears. Yet the sound was not merely heard. It was felt, vibrating in their teeth, their bones, their hearts. And with each toll, the shadows grew darker. Figures appeared in the aisles, monks in rotted habits, their faces pale and waxen, their eyes hollow sockets. They moved in silence, kneeling before the chained tree, their lips mouthing prayers no living tongue could form. Harrow's mind raced. He recalled the chronicles. The monks had bound something within the abbey, something that demanded worship. The bells were not rung to summon the faithful, but to feed the imprisoned thing. Ashcombe's voice rose above the tolling. Do you see? The abbey lives again. Tonight, we give it what it craves. The guests screamed, as the monks turned toward them. Their mouths opened, and from their throats came not words, but the sound of bells. Shrill, metallic, endless. Harrow stumbled back, clutching his journal. He realized the chains on the fir tree were not decoration. They were shackles, binding something beneath the altar. The ground trembled. The chains rattled. And from beneath the stones, a hand emerged. Long, skeletal, tipped with claws of iron. The creature rose, dragging itself into the candlelight. Its body was a lattice of bones wrapped in scraps of vestments. Its skull crowned with a halo of rusted bells. Each movement sent a chorus of tolls through the air. A cacophony that bent reality itself. The monks bowed to it. Ashcombe spread his arms. Tears streaming down his face. Behold the bell saint. The true spirit of Christmas. But Harrow saw the truth. This was no saint. It was a parasite. A spirit born of worship, twisted into hunger. The monks had died feeding it. Their prayers transformed into endless tolling. The guests fled. But the abbey's doors slammed shut. The bells roared, shaking the walls, cracking the stained glass. The creature advanced, its hollow eyes fixed on Harrow. Harrow remembered the old law. Bells could summon, but they could also banish. He seized a fallen censer, its chain ringing faintly, and swung it against the altar. The iron clanged, discordant, breaking the rhythm of the tolls. The creature shrieked, its bells clashing in fury. The monks dissolved into ash, their prayers cut short. Ashcombe screamed as the chains on the fir tree snapped, wrapping around him, dragging him into the altar's maw. The bells tolled once more, then fell silent. The abbey collapsed, stones tumbling, spire shattering. Harrow crawled into the snow, his ears bleeding, his mind fractured. Behind him, the ruins smouldered, the bells buried forever. Years later, villagers spoke of a man wandering the moors, muttering in broken Latin, his ears scarred, his eyes haunted. They said he carried a censer, and that wherever he walked, faint bells followed. On Christmas Eve, when the wind howled across the heather, travellers swore they heard them, the bells of Blackthorn Abbey, tolling for the living and the dead alike, and those who followed the sound never returned. The Frostbound Choir. In the winter of 1823, the village of Hallamere was buried beneath snow so deep that roofs collapsed, and livestock froze in their pens. Yet on Christmas Eve, the villagers swore they heard singing, soft, ethereal voices drifting through the streets. It was not unusual for careless to brave the cold. But these voices were strange. They sang in Latin, not English, and their harmonies were so perfect. They seemed inhuman. The villagers followed the sound to the old churchyard, where they found footprints in the snow. But no singers. By morning, 3 families were gone. Their homes stood open, fires still burning, meals half eaten. Only the snow remained, marked with lines like musical notation, carved into the drifts by unseen hands. Nearly 70 years later, in 1892, Margaret Ellison, a schoolteacher fascinated by folklore, arrived in Hallamere. She had read of the Frostbound Choir in obscure journals, voices that appeared only on Christmas Eve, luring listeners into the snow. Margaret was determined to document the phenomenon. She gathered a group of villagers in the church, armed with lanterns and hymnals, and vowed they would sing louder than the phantom choir. The night was bitter, the air sharp as glass. At midnight, the voices returned. They rose from the snow itself, layered and resonant, weaving hymns that no living throat could sustain. The villagers trembled, but Margaret urged them to sing. Their voices faltered against the spectral harmonies, swallowed by the cold. Then the lanterns went out. In the darkness, Margaret saw them, Figures formed from frost and shadow. Their faces pale masks. Their mouths open in eternal song. They wore tattered robes rimed with ice. And their eyes glowed faintly, like candles guttering in the wind. The frost-bound choir circled the villagers, their voices rising. Each note froze the air, crystallizing breath into shards that fell like glass. One by one, the villagers collapsed, their bodies stiffening, their eyes glazing with frost. Margaret alone remained standing, clutching her hymnal. She realized the choir was not singing to her. They were singing through her. Her own breath turned to mist, her voice joining theirs without her consent. Margaret's mind reeled. She remembered the old legends, that the choir were monks who had perished in a blizzard centuries ago, trapped while singing midnight mass, their voices preserved by the storm, bound to the snow forever. But this was no simple haunting. The choir demanded new voices each Christmas, swelling their ranks with the living. Those who joined never returned, their bodies lost to the drifts, their souls woven into the eternal hymn. Margaret tried to resist, but the hymn was inside her now, threading through her veins. She dropped her hymnal, its pages freezing solid, and staggered toward the door. The choir followed, their song rising to a crescendo. Outside, the snow was alive. It rose in waves, sculpted by the music, forming arches and corridors of ice. Margaret stumbled through them, her ears bleeding, her breath stolen by the song. She reached the churchyard, where the graves stood silent. The choir surrounded her, their faces inches from hers, their voices piercing her skull. She screamed, but her scream became a note, perfectly pitched, absorbed into the harmony. The villagers who had fallen rose again, their bodies stiff, their mouths open in song. Margaret saw her students among them, their eyes blank, their voices stolen. The choir's leader stepped forward, a figure taller than the rest, crowned with icicles, its mouth a cavern of frost. It raised its arms, and the hymn shifted, becoming a dirge. Margaret felt her heart slow, her blood crystallize. She fell to her knees, her voice joining theirs forever. The next morning, Hallamere was silent. The church stood empty, its doors frozen shut. The villagers who had gathered were gone, their homes abandoned. But travelers passing through swore they heard singing. A choir, faint but clear, drifting across the snow. They say if you follow the sound, you will see them, figures of frost, singing in perfect harmony. And among them, a woman clutching a frozen hymnal, her eyes glowing like candles. The frost-bound choir grows each year, and on Christmas Eve, their song waits for new voices. The Krampus Mirror. In the winter of 1874, deep in the Bavarian Alps, a family named Grubber prepared for Christmas Eve. Their farmhouse was warm, the hearth blazing, the tree decorated with apples and straw stars. But in the corner of the room stood something new. A mirror. Tall, framed in black wood carved with antlers. It had been delivered days earlier, with no sender's name, no note, only a single word etched into the glass. Krampus. The children laughed nervously. They had heard the old tales of the horned demon who punished the wicked at Christmas. But their father dismissed it. It is only a story. The mirror is a gift. That night, As the snow howled outside, the family gathered to sing carols. Their voices rose. But in the mirror, another family appeared. They looked identical. Same faces. Same clothes. But their eyes were black. Their mouths twisted. Their carols were not songs, but growls. The grubbers froze, watching their reflections sing in voices not their own. Then the mirror fogged, and the figures stepped forward, pressing against the glass. The youngest child screamed, as a clawed hand pushed through the surface. The mirror rippled like water, and from it emerged a figure. Tall, horned, its body draped in chains. Its hooves struck the floor with a sound like thunder. Krampus had come. The candles guttered. The fire died. The room filled with the stench of smoke and iron. The demon's eyes glowed red, and in its hand it carried a sack, stitched from human skin. One by one, the reflections dragged the family toward the mirror. Their screams echoed, swallowed by the glass. The father fought, striking the demon with a poker. But Krampus laughed, a sound like bells breaking. He seized the man and shoved him into the sack. His cries were muffled, fading into silence. The mother begged, clutching her children. But the mirror showed her sins, whispered them aloud. Lies, cruelty, envy, each word carved into the glass, until her reflection reached out and pulled her inside. The children were left, trembling. Their reflections grinned, mouths stretching impossibly wide. They sang a carol, but the words were curses. Each note froze the air. Each verse dragged them closer. The eldest tried to run, but the door was gone, replaced by endless black glass. He struck it, but the mirror swallowed his fists, pulling him through. The youngest remained, alone, staring at Krampus. The demon bent low, its horns scraping the rafters. It whispered, "Every Christmas, the mirror must feed." The child sobbed, but the mirror rippled, and his reflection reached out, smiling, before dragging him into the void. By morning, the farmhouse was silent, the hearth cold, the tree bare. Only the mirror remained, standing in the corner, its surface smooth. Travelers who passed by swore they heard voices inside it. Carols sung in broken tones. Children crying. Chains rattling. And each Christmas Eve, the mirror appeared in another home. Unbidden. Waiting. Those who look too long see themselves singing, with black eyes, and mouths that do not belong to them. And when the bells toll midnight, Krampus steps through,